And Kathy, I do see your screen. And when you're ready.
Yep.
Perfect. Great. You are all set, Kathy.
Okay. So today it's a big topic, but I'll be going over the behavioral management strategies for kids, children, students with Tourette and other related disorders. I wanted to just quickly talk about the complexities of these neurological disorders. And I want to mention this because in order to come up with a good behavioral intervention support, it's really important that we understand the symptoms a little bit better. So the symptoms are unique, they change, they wax and wane. Stress almost always makes symptoms worse. Symptoms are suggestible, which means that if I say don't slam the door, the person that I'm talking to might slam the door, when if I hadn't said it, they might not. So that symptoms can be suggestible, which is difficult sometimes for us. The ability to suppress symptoms is inconsistent and can vary from one person to the next. Suppressing, it interferes with concentration. So if somebody is suppressing their symptoms, they may not be listening carefully. If you're doing homework with them or working with them, and you say something to them, if they're suppressing, they may not get what you're saying. And actually, lots of times when people are ticking, that they can concentrate more than if they're suppressing. And depending on the severity and the environment, children can struggle to manage tics and the co-occurring conditions, as well as emotional regulations. If they could control their symptoms, then we wouldn't have a problem. But it's very, very, very difficult to manage symptoms. I don't like to even say control, because they don't really have control. They can't stop them. It's really more of a management type thing, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And the only thing consistent about Tourette syndrome is the inconsistency. So, people ask me, well, what are the common difficulties and what are common IEP supports and 504 supports? And it really depends on the particular child. So every time I do a presentation, I talk about the fact that neurological disorders are disabilities of disinhibition. And the reason I do is because I think this is central to understanding the behavior of a person with neurological difficulties. And if we don't understand this, then we're not going to be able to really work in a positive fashion with the person. So it's a condition in people with primary neurological disorders that limit a person's ability to use his inhibitory process and learned inhibitory skills. But it's not that people with neurological disorders, it's not that they don't know what to do and that they want to do what they know to be appropriate. But in the moment, they have a hard time inhibiting. So unfortunately, a lot of times what we tend to do is we want to teach them skills. They know the skills. What we need to do is to help them be able to manage it, particularly when their anxiety goes up, because that's when symptoms get worse. So it can be contextual or non-contextual. I have people tell me all the time that I don't think this is part of Tourette because he said the words in context. It can be in context, or it can be totally out of context. It can be out of the blue, or it can be something that makes sense to the situation in the moment. Again, not able to inhibit. So it can be movements, behaviors, swearing, inappropriate comments, emotional outbursts, rage, infantile behaviors, noises, face, laughter. It just can be, there's so many different symptoms that nobody would ever be able to list them all. So I used to be an English teacher, so science is not my real strength, but I found this slide that talks about the basal ganglia. And I've been working with people with Tourette syndrome for over 30 years. My son was diagnosed back in the 1990s. And even back then, we didn't know much about Tourette, but we did know that the basal ganglia was impacted. There were some people that actually wanted to call Tourette and other similar neurological difficulties as a basal ganglia syndrome. It didn't work, but I understand why they wanted to call it that, because the basal ganglia is so incredibly important for people with Tourette. It's the basal ganglia that, what's written in red is not written by me. It was on the slide written by scientists. So it's the basal ganglia that chooses which actions to perform at the moment. So you can see that makes sense. If it chooses which action, it may do an action that other parts of the brain the person doesn't want to do. But if the basal ganglia is impacted, it's kind of like, when there's too much alcohol in our system and too much alcohol in our brain, people get disinhibited. They have a hard time inhibiting because the alcohol impacts the basal ganglia. So Tourette and other neurological disorders impact the basal ganglia. So it's choosing in the moment. So sometimes they can suppress, sometimes they, in the same situation, they can act in an appropriate manner, and then the next moment they have a difficulty doing it. So remember the basal ganglia and the disability of disinhibition. This is really critical. I hope you guys can't hear my dog barking, and I hope my husband takes care of that. So the iceberg is an important slide that we developed a few years ago, and it's a nice visual because it helps people really understand. I'm sorry. Oh. All right, sorry about that. So this is a nice slide that a lot of people have commented on that helps people understand, because we can see the motor tics, we can see the vocal tics, but it's all the other stuff underneath that oftentimes are much more difficult to manage for the person than even the tics. Now, I'm not saying everybody that has a neurological disorder has all of these difficulties that are underneath the surface, but they are possible. And it's because of all of these difficulties and challenges that kids, people with neurological disorders can have the difficulties. So neurological rage can be part of it. Handwriting is almost always a problem. Obsessive compulsive, attention deficit, social difficulties, sensory. So they're all in there. And actually the CDC estimates that 86% of the people with Tourette do have co-occurring disorders. And I included this slide, not because I really want to go into depth about it, but I want to show, so a child or a person, has ADD, they have the disinhibition, they have sensory challenges, they have the obsessive compulsive, and they all interact with each other. And then they have the tics, and then they try to suppress. And so it's no wonder that people with Tourette can be very frustrated. They feel blamed, they get angry, and some people do have the neurological rage. The rage is not your normal anger gone crazy. It's because of the chemistry in the brain. So it's not something that they want to do. It's not something that they enjoy. But can you imagine trying to manage all this stuff that's going on, and by the end of the day, they're pretty exhausted. So what can trigger challenging behaviors. The Tourettic obsessive compulsive. Now, people with Tourette can have the typical obsessive compulsive disorder, but a lot of people with Tourette have the Tourettic obsessive compulsive. And there's doctors that I have a lot of respect for that will say the difference between the regular obsessive compulsive and the Tourette is that typical obsessive compulsive is about fear. So they're, about germs, or fear that somebody's going to die, or fear of going outside, or, it's more fear-based. Whereas Tourettic obsessive compulsive is more similar to symptoms of typical Tourette. So symptoms of Tourette are caused by urges that are really, 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 really difficult to manage. So the Tourettic obsessive compulsive is a response to urges. I have an urge to tap the table 5 times, and every time I go past that table, I have to tap it 5 times. It's more urge based. When I'm in the hallway, there's the fire alarm that I need to touch. I need to do my homework perfectly. There's a lot of people do have some perfection type issues. So, and if you want to be perfect, but you've got all this other stuff that's interfering, you can understand how that could trigger some difficulties. I want to finish this. I need to finish this. And a parent or a teacher will say, well, we don't have time to finish that right now. You need to put it away. Well, if they have the obsessive compulsive that they must finish it, then you can see where it might bring up some anger issues. Anxiety and stress almost always make symptoms worse. And by the end of the day, trying to manage anxiety and stress is exhausting, and can lead to some behavioral challenges as well. I mean, if any of us have a lot of anxiety, or any of us are super stressed, it's not beyond the imagination that we might have some behaviors as well. Frustration. A lot of people with Tourette are very bright, very talented, but aren't able to demonstrate their talents and their intellectual abilities because of symptoms. And so the frustration of knowing that you're really bright and not being able to demonstrate it, or getting bad grades, or people saying, well, I know you're smart, I know you can do this, the frustration can build up. They get blamed at home, at school, out in the community, people that don't understand, and even some people that do understand. It's not unusual for people with Tourette to get blamed. You have to do that now. Can't you do that someplace else? Or a lot of people will say to us, well, can they substitute? Well, sometimes, but really difficult. A lot of kids with Tourette, you can imagine, get bullied in school. I'm a consultant, but I also consult for the National Tourette Association, and we have supports to try to help when somebody is being bullied. Skills deficits. So again, if a person is really, really bright, but they have executive function, they ADD, and they're very disorganized, then they can't demonstrate their true abilities, and that can be very frustrating. And sensory needs, whether it's sensory that the person needs more sensory input, or it's sensory that is overwhelming. So if something is very noisy, or too many people, it can be a sensory overload, which really can very easily trigger some behavioral challenges. So let's first talk about what doesn't help. Talking, yelling, or threatening somebody during a meltdown gets no place. It's, compare it to yelling at or threatening or talking to somebody that, chemistry is out of whack because they've had too much alcohol. It's common sense that you have to wait until the person, gets their brain back in balance, and then you can talk to them. But during a meltdown, it just doesn't make any sense. And it's what we do. I know as a parent, it's really hard because you want to help the person. And so lots of times we will be talking or even yelling or making threats. Doesn't work. Because what we do, the person needs to de-escalate, and by doing this, we are threatening them more and more and more, and so adrenaline kicks in. Now you've got somebody that's finding difficulty remaining control, and they also get the adrenaline kick. So talking, yelling, or threatening somebody just is not a good idea. Believing behaviors are purposeful. And I put behaviors in quotes because we use the word behaviors. I wish there was another word beside behavior, because the Webster's definition of behaviors is how you respond to something. So symptoms can be seen as behaviors because they're responding to something. But our society sees behaviors as being bad. So I try to almost always put behaviors in quotes because it could be symptoms. So if you're believing that the behaviors are purposeful, then you're not thinking about the fact that they might be symptoms. And if we know that they are symptoms, it's much more likely to help the person. We want to help, but if we think they're doing it on purpose, then we tend more toward punishment and getting angry. So try not to see quote unquote behaviors as purposeful. Rewards and punishment. This is something that our society really likes a lot. And it's actually based on Skinner, who decided that all behaviors would respond to consequences. If they're on purpose, yes, maybe. But if they're neurological, how do you reward a person for not scratching a mosquito bite? Or how do you punish a person for scratching a mosquito bite? It's an urge. How do you punish somebody for not blinking when the sun is bright, or if the wind is strong? It's neurological urges. These are physiological urges. So rewards and punishments just really don't work. And sometimes they work in the moment, but on the whole, you can't reward and punishment the neurological difficulty. Believing that the child is oppositional defiant. This is something that I also hear a lot. A lot of kids actually have a diagnosis of oppositional defiant. There's a lot of doctors, Dr. Ross Green, and other people that I will mention at the end, strongly believe that oppositional defiant is not a diagnosis. It's a symptom. So if a child is being oppositional, why? What's the reason? Again, punishment. If you punish them, that's not going to help. Okay, so you're being oppositional defiant, you need to go to timeout. What's that teaching? Nothing. So getting past thinking that a kid is being oppositional. Instead, if you see them being oppositional, see it as a clue. Behavioral management philosophy is based on consequences. a lot of people, behavioral management people are, becoming more and more popular, and fortunately, they're also becoming more and more aware of Tourette, because the philosophies of consequence don't work. If you have the smiley face thing, it's going to increase the anxiety. If you have a chart on the board or chart at home, and I'm going to put a check mark every time, either positive or negative. So we're going to put a check mark when you do this, and when you get so many points by Friday, we'll go out and have pizza. That would be a rewarding type of consequence. Or if you get 3 check marks, then you won't be able to go outside for the weekend. It doesn't make sense, because these are neurological urges. So consequences do not work. So any response that doesn't teach ways to manage the symptoms, that's really what we need to look at. We got to stop punishing these kids and helping them develop strategies to manage. There was a boy, I forget what state he was, out west someplace. I got a call from the social worker, and he was a middle school student that had a strong symptom or a strong urge to touch, and he began touching people inappropriately. So she worked with him and talked to him, and between he and her, they came up with a strategy that whenever he feels the urge to touch somebody, he would take both of his hands and put both of his hands behind his back, and he would hold his own hands. And I'm not saying that's a universal way of working, but it worked for this young boy. So finding ways to manage is the clue. And removal of enjoyable activities. This one kind of drives me crazy because you got kids with neurological disorders and difficulties. They really have they have a lot of mountains to climb. And they oftentimes do not feel very successful, even though they may be very talented and very bright. So my son, at an early age, we discovered that he excelled in drumming. And people told us that if he is being inappropriate, that what we needed to do was, take the drumming lessons away. We didn't do that. We never did that, because it was the one thing that my son was very, very successful at that gave him a good self-esteem. And so removing enjoyable activities doesn't make any sense. They need to feel success. They need to have a good self-esteem. And sometimes whether it's sports or music or being in a play or writing or science or whatever, don't remove the activities. And a young boy once said to me, don't ever tell them being us adults, what you like, because they will either make you earn it or they will take it away. And that is what we do. We got to stop doing that. Kids have a hard life. And so whatever happens, don't remove the thing that they feel most successful at. So de-escalating. Avoid demanding. Demanding that a person, do something. So a kid has a really hard day at school, and he comes home, and his parents start demanding that he clean his room. He may need time to chill. Demanding is like a red flag to anyone. It's you're just asking for trouble. Validate their feelings instead of their actions. Boy, that must have been really hard today. When you did that must have been really difficult for you. Don't try to reason with them in the moment. You can reason afterwards and come up with strategies, but in the moment, and this is another thing we try to do, we try to reason with them and tell them why what they're doing doesn't make any sense. What they're doing is an urge to a physical neurological urge, and it may not make sense, but trying to reason with them in the moment isn't going to help. And it's like pouring gasoline on a fire. It's gonna make the fire worse. Try to avoid the word no. No is a red flag also. So work around using other words beside the word no. Can we go to the store? I need to buy these baseball cards. No. Well, there's going to be an explosion most often. Rather than saying, well, you know, let's eat dinner and then maybe we can think about going after dinner. Love them no matter what. Whenever I talk to parents, I think the most important thing we can do is to let them know that we love them unconditionally. Regardless of what's happening in their lives, loving them is so obviously so critically important. Remember, most likely the behaviors are maybe due to symptoms. And like I said, if we think they're symptoms, then we're more likely to help than if we think they're purposeful bad behaviors, then we're likely not to help. Be aware of body language. So if you see a kid that starts moving around a lot or starts playing with his fingers, or you know, the kids that ears turn red when they start getting anxious and angry. So just be aware of body language and see it as a clue, and that maybe it's time to take some time off. Maybe it's time to go outside and ride your bike. Body language can be very helpful for us. And don't yell to be heard over a screaming child. A screaming adult, an adult that the behavioral regulation is not there. If you've got an adult that's angry, this adult is not going to calm down the child. So screaming at each other, again, is throwing gasoline on the fire. So what can help? If we can remain calm, now I'm not saying this is easy, but if we can remain calm and appear non-aggressive, that can help, because it de-escalates rather than escalating. And please, only one adult at a time. I have done a lot of visits at school and observations, and I'll see a kid starting to lose control, and one teacher will go over, and if that's not working, another teacher will join them. And so now there's two adults that are talking to this kid. It just only escalates things. Having a non-verbal plan on ways to communicate to each other that the stress level is going up. So the child can have a non-verbal way to demonstrate to you that this is getting out of control, my anxiety is increasing. But I also think it's important for an adult to have a nonverbal clue to let the kid know that their stress level is also going up. So it's got to be, you know, a two-way thing, and communication is critically important. So there needs to be, it needs to be okay to have a time and a place in which to de-escalate. At home, at friends, in school, at relatives. My little granddaughter, I don't know how she learned this, but when she was about 3 years old, and she's now 9 and she still doesn't. I was over babysitting one time, and all of a sudden she disappeared. And I said to my grandson, who was a little bit older, I said, where'd Sophia go? And he said, oh, she went upstairs. She'll go upstairs and cry, and then she'll feel better and she'll come back down. I thought, wow, that's great. She learned that at a really early age. So if we can help people and let relatives know and let friends know that if we're coming to dinner, that the kid has you know, something to help him calm down, that it's okay for him to go into another room. It's not being impolite. It's a way to help de-escalate. Accept apologies. if kids don't want to act like this, and when they apologize, it's really, 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 really important that we accept their apologies, because if we say things like, well, I don't care if you're sorry, I'm still really angry. You can be angry and you can be hurt, but recognize that the person is apologizing, and that's important. Most times, people with neurological disorders, if they lose control, they don't want to lose control. So a lot of times they are remorseful afterwards and will apologize, unless people stop accepting their apologies, and then they stop apologizing. Sorry, I'm drinking water. Have a plan in which a parent walks away without saying anything. So again, that's when your stress level is up. You show a nonverbal clue that your stress level is up, and so there's a plan ahead of time that, if I start getting a little crazy myself, I'm gonna, I'll do this nonverbal thing and I will walk away, and try not to say anything, because once you start walking away and not saying anything is fine, but if the kid says, well, you can't walk away, and you say, well, yes, I can, then you've started the exchange again. So trying to walk away without saying anything can be helpful. Reduce anxiety any way you can. That's just everywhere in all of our Tourette materials at the Tourette Association. Reducing anxiety is critically important. And again, encourage the creative abilities, the sports, the skills. So anxiety, I love this quote: anxiety is always the enemy of intelligence. The minute anxiety arises, intelligence closes to search for anything that will relieve the anxiety. So if a person is becoming anxious, they're not thinking rationally. So we need to really try to reduce anxiety. So if a student, lots of students with neurological disorders, they don't like timed tests. That immediately increases the anxiety. So depending on how high the anxiety is, if they can't reduce it, it may end up being a very bad situation. So be aware that anxiety is always the enemy of intelligence. And actually, they've done studies that show that your IQ actually drops when you are in a very anxious situation. So when we go around and do presentations around the country, we bring our emotional vase. And I want to just do this really quickly because I think it's an important concept. So we wake up in the morning and our emotional vase is pretty empty. Not always totally empty, but fairly empty. So having an impact, somebody doing something that might normally make us very angry. If our emotional vase is pretty empty, then we're pretty good. But now it's starting to get a little fuller, and so it increases the impact of somebody saying something or something negative happening. So it increases the emotions, it increases the anxiety. Then it becomes fuller and fuller. So as it gets fuller, it takes less and less to have a negative impact. And when it's dangerously full, it really takes less and less for a much bigger impact. And then you get it right up, right, it's full, right, topped off. So you can get a negative impact, you can get a rage, you can get a very bad response from something that looks very minimal. And what we do is we say, well, what happened immediately prior to him becoming anxious or him throwing the table across the room? What happened right prior to that? And what we need to do is look at and help them learn to manage their emotional vase. So when your emotional vase starts getting halfway full, what can you do to remove the vase or reduce the vase so that it's not right at the top? So if down midway somebody says something, it might not end up in a negative situation. But if it's full right up to the tippy top and somebody says something, it may easily overflow. So we need to be aware that all of us have emotional vases, and when they get fuller and fuller, it takes less and less for us to have a bad reaction to it. So again, the answer is helping the person to recognize their emotional vase and recognize when the anxiety is starting to increase and what they can do to reduce the emotional vase. Sometimes it's just going to get a drink of water. Sometimes it's playing an instrument. Sometimes it's drumming. Sometimes it's drawing. Sometimes it's chewing on something. You know, it depends on the kid, but whatever will reduce the emotional vase is important. So what's helpful in school and at home? I'm just checking the time here, okay. Assisting the child in developing the plans for reducing the vase. They won't do this on their own. They need help and support, and they need calm help and support. And it's not going to always work. There's going to be times when, you know, that they have been able to reduce their vase, but all of a sudden they're not able to reduce their vase. And I think that's true of all of us with our emotions. What's helpful is to have someone, a safe person, and it's helpful for everyone to recognize and respect the child's need to reduce the vase. And one thing kids will say a lot is, when I'm starting to feel anxious, stop talking. It's not what we do. We adults, we will try to reason with them, and we will try to calm them down by talking to them. And I can't tell you the percentage of kids that will say, just stop talking. Leave them alone. Give them some space and time to rebalance their brain chemistry. If we keep yabbing at them and talking at them and suggesting things, it's not going to help them reduce their vase. It's not going to help them reestablish and rebalance their brain chemistry. So I'm not saying any of this is easy, particularly the stop talking one I found particularly hard. What's helpful at school? So support for a child to be comfortable with his Tourette. I talked to many people, parents and educators, and one of the first things we want to try to do is to have the child comfortable with the fact that they have Tourette. It's not all of who they are, it's only part of who they are. I used to tell my son, you're 5 foot, you have brown eyes, you have Tourette, you have blonde hair. It's just part of the person. It's not who they are. And one of the things that's very helpful at school is to have a trusted person, a person who's non-judgmental, and a person that is open to learning about Tourette. Again, I've been studying Tourette for about 35 years now, and I still learn. So you want a person that's open to learning. You don't want somebody that says, I know everything there is about Tourette, because I would question that. But if a child feels that the person is non-judgmental and the child trusts the person, he's going to be more willing to go to this person and talk about the strange things, the bizarre things that are happening in his life because of the Tourette. And again, I can't tell you, it's so often that Tourette's have an exceptional talent or interest. So really support that, really encourage that. I see so many kids that are so talented, and they need some encouragement. Informing all of the school personnel. So you want the kids in the classroom to know that they have Tourette, and the first step there is getting the child comfortable with the fact that they have Tourette, and letting the classmates know it. When kids don't know what's going on, that's when they bully. So if we can let at least the classmates know that this is why I make these faces, or this is why I make this noise, and that it's okay. Because you know what? Because I have Tourette, I'm a good drummer, or because I have Tourette, I am a good artist. Being comfortable with the Tourette, it's hard but important, and that goes a long ways in informing school personnel. It only takes one cafeteria, and I'm not picking on cafeteria people, but unfortunately, those are the people that we typically leave out and don't let them know what's going on. So if one staff person says the wrong thing, it can escalate the situation, and I've seen it so many times. We'll end up in the child being suspended. Again, here informing classmates, less bullying and reduce stress, because imagine walking into a classroom with 30 kids and they don't know why you're making that noise. They don't know why you're standing up every few minutes and tapping your feet. So walking into the classroom is very stressful because nobody knows. But once everybody knows, it reduces the stress. And once we can reduce stress, it can reduce symptoms. And request a psychoeducational or a neuroeducational evaluation. When kids are in elementary school, oftentimes their intellect disguises their disabilities. And then they get into junior high and high school, and the intellect, the abilities, the disability starts disguising their true abilities. So in elementary school, I may have said that wrong, they're intelligent and they cover up their disabilities, but then they get into middle and high school and their disabilities start really disguising their intellect, which can be frustrating and can make a person very upset. So what are the federal laws? And I'm not going to, obviously, I'm not going to go into depth here, but the IDEA, a student that has an IEP, the law says that the team must consider a functional behavioral assessment, which I'll talk about in a second, and a positive behavioral intervention if behaviors interfere with the learning of that student or other students. Again, I've been doing this. I was an advocate at Starbridge for many, many years, and my office was right next to an attorney. And so I have read IDEA. I'm just one of those people that kind of just like reading law. And IDEA rarely uses the word must. It very rarely tells school districts that you must do this. But it does say that if behaviors are interfering with the learning of the student or other students, that the team must consider. Now, it's not saying that it must do, but it must consider a functional behavioral assessment and positive behavioral intervention plan. And there's I've included a link there. We have a guide for conducting functional behavioral assessments and developing positive behavioral intervention plans. So a positive behavioral intervention plan, it's using the clues. So a functional behavioral assessment is you get clues. You know, when does the behavior occur? When the behavior doesn't occur? Where does it occur? Where does it not occur? You collect as many clues as you can about the target behavior that we're trying to support. And then we take all that information, we take all those clues, and we write a positive behavioral intervention plan. Now, I will say that IDEA does say positive behavioral intervention plans, but it also talks about behavioral intervention plans. I wish it had positive throughout, but unfortunately, a lot of times it will be just a behavioral intervention plan. And so what's the difference? So if there's a kid that is rocking or talking or tapping, a behavioral intervention plan, or he's not able to finish his work, a behavioral plan would be either to send him out in the hallway or to keep him after school or keep him in from recess so that he can finish his work. A positive behavioral intervention plan would be figuring out why isn't he able to finish his work? Why is he tapping? Does he have some sensory needs? The functional behavioral assessment hopefully would come up with those clues, and then we can do positive and proactive interventions so that the behavior is less likely to reoccur. It is definitely not a contract. I've seen some schools that will think that a behavioral intervention plan is a contract for the student. It's really telling the educators what they must do in order to help reduce the likelihood of the behavior reoccurring. So it's not a contract for the kid. It's not, you know, you need to do this and you need to do this, and if you do that, then this is going to happen. It's not a contract. It's for educators to help the student. I'm very opposed to contracts. I mean, talk about increasing anxiety. There you go. And there's also the Americans with Disabilities Act that oversees 504 plans. 504 plans are not based on academics. And they also offer the manifestation protection, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, the same as IDEA does. So I hear all the time, well, he's not eligible for a 504 plan because his grades are good. 504 plans are civil rights. So if a child is being bullied but has good grades, that doesn't mean that he's not eligible for a 504 plan. We have some pretty good information about 504 plans on the Tourette website that you can look at, but please just remember, it's not based on academics, it's based on civil rights. So if a kid has problems writing and taking notes, and the student next to him does not have problems writing and taking notes, he is under a disadvantage when he goes home to study. So he's not receiving equal access to education. So that's what 504s are, really civil rights to provide accommodations and modifications. So manifestation determination is huge to understand when you're talking about difficulties in behaviors. So the law says that if a child is suspended for 10 days, or if there's a pattern to the behavior, or if the school is considering a long-term suspension for more than 10 days, then they must, again, this is another time they say must, have a manifestation determination meeting. And at that, it's determined if the behavior was due to a disability. So was it a manifestation of the disability? Or also if the IEP is not being followed. And this is a whole nother long presentation, but just quickly, just know that there is manifestation determination for kids that have IEPs and that have 504s. So if they agree that the behavior was a manifestation, it was due to the disability, they cannot suspend the student. But if they determine that nope, it's not related to the disability, they can discipline the same as students that have no disability. So this is one of my favorite quotes, and and I think you're not going to remember everything that went across today, but I remember when my son was young and I went to a presentation and I walked away remembering this. It's our explanation of the behavior that leads directly to how we respond to it. It's our explanation of the behavior that leads directly to how we respond to it. So again, if our explanation for the behavior is that he's being bad, we're going to punish. But if our explanation is that it's part of the disorder, then we're going to want to provide some support. And two people that I really respect and encourage you to look up are Dr. Ross Green. He's written books, The Explosive Child, the Student I don't know, he's written a couple books, but his website is amazing, and he has a lot of videos, and he has a lot of suggestions. Mona Delahuck, she thinks that we need to shift how we look at the child. Again, it's our explanation of the behavior. They both disagree that that oppositional defiant disorder is a diagnosis. Dr. Ross Green says that it's chronically inflexible, which I find a lot more pleasing than oppositional defiant. So I would recommend both those sites. And to end, if you get the child through high school and he or she thinks that they are the best thing since sliced bread, he or she is going to be okay. Your kid's mental health is more important than their grades. Support their strengths. Whatever you can do to help their self-esteem is really a primary goal. And I know this is all true because my youngest son, Matthew, has been my teacher. Like I said, he was diagnosed back in the 1990s. And I love the quote, every adult needs a child to teach. It's how we adults learn. I learned so much from Matthew about Tourette and about what works and what doesn't work. And a lot of what I learned was because I was doing it wrong. But, you know, I have learned over the years, and he's now a successful adult. He's had a lot of documentaries done on him. One of the ones that is interesting for parents is the 75 watts. It's kind of a light at the end of the tunnel because Matthew did have some pretty significant challenging behaviors and neurological rage. And the 75 watts, you can see him now as a successful adult. So it's kind of nice to see that there is a light. So if anybody has any questions, I think we have a few minutes.
Thanks, Kathy. We actually do have a few questions, so I will start with those. So the first one is, how do you give appropriate consequences?
Well, I don't really like the word consequences because that usually implies punishment. So how do you properly respond to a behavior that is inappropriate? You help them figure out a different way to manage it. Now, if a kid, you know, kids are kids, and if there is something that is clearly on purpose, you know, I'm not opposed to punishing a child for typical behavior that needs to be changed, but most times with kids with neurological disorders, I try to stay away from the word consequence. And if it is a consequence, it'll be a positive consequence. So what comes to my mind is I was working with a kid, I think he was in the second or third grade, and I was doing an observation one day, and you know how they all sit in a circle and they eat their crackers, and this kid just made a disastrous mess of his crackers all over the rug. And so the teacher said, Charlie, come here. Could you go up and get my Scotch tape holder? And so he did, and he came back with it, and she ripped off a big piece of Scotch tape and wrapped it around his fingers and said, you know, it looks like you've really made a mess here, and it's going to bother other kids. So you can use the tape and kind of pick up all the crumbs. So that was a positive consequence. But they're not easy. You know, there's no book. I wish there was a book that here's the positive consequences for this behavior. It's just being very creative and thinking outside the box and trying your best to stay calm. You know, not make things worse.
Great, thank you, Kathy. The next question is, how do you explain to people, like teachers or schools, why disinhibition occurs more around caregivers? Is there a neurological or psychological explanation we can provide?
Boy, I wish there was. I really wish there was, because this is so true. It's so common for kids to go to school and and their behaviors are much better in school than they are at home. The disinhibition at home. And, I've heard a lot of reasons for it. I'm not committed to any of them. I mean, I've heard that, that the kid knows that the parents are gonna love him regardless. I'm not so sure. I've heard that, that the kid is at home and it's a more relaxed setting. If anybody comes up with a scientific reason, please get a hold of me and let me know, because I get asked this a lot. But just know, when I do presentations or when I talk to schools, I do tell them that the difficulties at home are usually much worse than they are in school, and it may be because school is so structured, that keeps the anxiety base lower, whereas at home, and there's not much structure, and so the anxiety base is easier to start getting fuller and fuller. But I'm really not committed to any of those answers. I think it's hard, and I've been trying to do as much research as I can on this, but just as much as I can, I tell schools that that it's going to be worse at home, and it's usually with the mother for whatever reason. So I wish I had a really good answer for you.
Thanks, Kathy. Can you answer it, or if you know, why is handwriting typically a problem with kids with Tourette syndrome?
Again, this is something that I've never had a really solid answer why, but it always is. I mean, again, how many years have I been doing this, and how many thousands and thousands of people have I met? They all have difficulty getting thoughts from the brain to the paper. It may be something about working memory. I've read about that recently, that when kids are in kindergarten and first grade, they're really just drawing their letters, and there's a lot of muscle memory. But when you get into answering the questions and thinking of complex answers and writing a lot more, the brain sort of becomes overwhelmed, and what gets damaged is the ability to write. Again, I wish I had a solid answer for that, because that would answer the question that I've had for years. Why is it? Why is it everybody I talk to, their kid has a hard time with writing? The thing that seems to help a lot of kids is to use a laptop or a tablet, and they're becoming more and more popular in the schools. So that can be a good thing. But there's also the organization of the thoughts. So if a kid is still struggling, even with the Chromebooks or the tablets, I would want to know if they have some attention deficit or executive functioning. Do they have difficulties organizing the thoughts in their brain? And a lot of these kids that have problems writing can tell you a book. So it really is the function of writing that is interfered with.
Great, thank you, Kathy. The next question is a psychoeducational or neurological educational evaluation or neuroeducational evaluation different from what a school psychologist will do with just the whisk?
No, what the school psychologist does is a psychoeducational evaluation. It's a terrible term, and I'm glad that it's starting to go away. But the thing is, when a school psychologist is using the whisk or doing an evaluation and assessment, the parents want to, and the law says that the school needs to evaluate everything that the parent is concerned about. So parents don't need to know you don't need to use the word dysgraphia for difficulty with writing. You can say, I want him evaluated for handwriting. Although I will say, if they're evaluated for handwriting, it has to be a long evaluation. I want him evaluated for organization skills, and hopefully, that will lead to executive functioning. A neuro evaluation is different, because a neuro evaluation is done by a neurologist, and hopefully it would be somebody, a neurologist that's familiar with Tourette, and would know the difficulties. So a neuro evaluation is a lot more in depth than the school psychoeducational eval.
Great, thanks. The last question that we have is, how do you boost a student's self-esteem when they are aware and ashamed of the behaviors but have no control?
Oh, that's hard. I mean, my son included, and every kid that I know, they are ashamed and they're not happy about what they're doing. But I think just constantly letting them know that you love them regardless. There's no real silver bullet. There's no real quick answer. But again, looking for what they're good at. Oh my God, we got told so often to, why are you allowing Matthew to continue with drum lessons when he's acting the way he's acting? I'm so glad that we did. If you can find something that they're good at, let them, take them out individually, and don't forget to pay attention to your other kids too. But yeah, getting the self-esteem up when they know they have this stuff. Showing videos. We have a lot of videos on the Tourette YouTube channel. You might want to surf through some of them and see, because if the kids can know that they're not the only ones in the world that has these challenges, that can help with their self-esteem. The Tourette Association, we educate teenagers to go into schools and talk about the fact that they have Tourette. And so when a child with Tourette that has difficulties with self-esteem because they're ashamed of their Tourette's and their tics, if they can get connected with another kid, or if they can see an older kid, or even a successful adult, whatever we can do to make Tourette normalized. And I'm telling you, having Tourette can be a positive thing. If there's anything that the kid does, good baseball or soccer or whatever, it's probably because of Tourette. So Tourette is not always a bad thing.
Thank you so much, Kathy. It looks like that's it for questions. And I want to thank everyone today for sharing an hour of your time with us, along with Kathy Giordano. And before we leave, Kathy, is there anything that you would like to say?
I guess if there was anything that really, really kind of said to you, oh, wow. My oh wow moment was, it's your explanation of the behavior that leads directly to how you respond to it. That has been my oh wow, and that's been, oh my God, 40 years ago, probably, no, not 40, 35 maybe. So, either it's it's your explanation or the disinhibition thing. And please feel free to contact us at the Tourette Association or at Starbridge. We can give you some help.
Thank you, Kathy. And we have several messages that says thank you for your time, thank you for your knowledge. So with that, thank you everyone for joining us today. And don't forget, Kathy will be doing one more in a series, and that's coming up. So check out our website and our current upcoming webinars at www.starbridgeinc.org. So thank you so much for being here. Have a good day.